Historical depictions of glorious deaths usually follow a predictable rhythm. A soldier takes a fatal blow, drops their weapons, and falls to the earth. But battlefield records occasionally reveal a much stranger phenomenon: individuals who manage to maintain a tactical presence even after their bodies have technically expired. These figures don't just die for a cause. They find ways to project strength and command from beyond the point of medical survival, creating an illusion of endurance that halts entire armies. From the bridges of 12th century Japan to the naval straits of Korea and the foxholes of the Pacific, the mechanics of these last stands rely on a specific, brutal logic: weaponizing the dead to protect the living. In 12th century Kyoto, a 6'6" warrior monk named Benkei was infamous for his hunt. Armed with a naginata, a long-reaching curved blade, he walked the streets on a quest to duel and defeat 1,000 samurai, collecting their swords as trophies of their perceived arrogance. At 999 victories, Benkei challenged a physically small man playing a flute near a shrine. Despite his massive size advantage, Benkei was humbled in combat. He abandoned his life as a wandering monk and pledged his permanent loyalty to the man, the legendary Minamoto no Yoshitsune. Their partnership ended years later at the Battle of Koromogawa. Yoshitsune's own brother turned against him, sending a force of 500 soldiers to surround their castle. Trapped and facing impossible odds, the pair prepared for a final stand. While Yoshitsune retreated inside to commit the ritual of seppuku, Benkei walked to the single bridge serving as the castle's entrance. He stood alone against the charging army, reportedly slaying 300 men as they tried to force their way past his reach. Unable to break him in close quarters, the enemy archers let loose a barrage of arrows. Benkei was struck dozens of times, his body becoming a pincushion of shafts, yet he remained upright and defiant. The army stood in a stalemate across the water, terrified of the man who refused to flinch or fall. When soldiers finally worked up the courage to cross the bridge, they discovered the truth. Benkei had already died, but he'd wedged his spear against the bridge's structure to prop up his own corpse. He had used his own body as a physical barrier, maintaining the illusion of a living threat just long enough for his master to finish his final ritual. By the late 16th century, Korea faced a catastrophic invasion from unified Japanese forces. The Korean military was led by officials who had never seen real combat, commanders who were so panicked they sank their own fleet rather than engage the Japanese at sea. The defense of the nation fell to Admiral Yi Sun-sin. He countered the Japanese boarding tactics with a new kind of floating fortress, the turtle ship. These vessels were heavily armed and featured spiked, iron-plated roofs that made it impossible for enemy soldiers to board and engage in the hand-to-hand combat they preferred. Yi's success sparked deep jealousy within the Korean government. He was falsely accused of desertion, stripped of his rank, and tortured. His replacement immediately lost nearly the entire navy in a disastrous Japanese trap, leaving the country defenseless. Reinstated out of desperation, Yi took command of the mere 13 ships that remained. In a legendary display of naval strategy, he successfully engaged over 300 Japanese vessels in a narrow strait, sinking 31 of them without losing a single one of his own. During his final offensive at the Battle of Noryang, Yi stood on the deck of his flagship, beating a war drum to maintain the fleet's momentum. In the heat of the retreat, a Japanese musket ball struck him in the armpit. Realizing the wound was fatal, Yi ordered his nephew to hide his body, put on his armor, and keep the drum beating. The drum continued to beat, and the armor remained visible at the flagship's rail. His men never knew their leader was gone, maintaining the morale necessary to drive the Japanese forces from Korea for good. On Saipan in July 1944, Captain Ben L. Solomon was operating out of a flooded field tent just 50 yards from the front lines. A dentist by training, he was acting as a surgeon, treating over 30 wounded Americans as the sounds of combat grew closer. The Japanese forces, sensing imminent defeat, launched a massive, suicidal banzai charge. They completely overran the American defensive perimeter, and Japanese soldiers began bayoneting wounded patients directly inside Solomon's medical tent. Solomon instantly transitioned from surgeon to combatant. He killed the attackers inside the tent and then held the entrance alone, shooting or bayoneting several more intruders in close-quarters combat. Realizing the camp was lost, Solomon ordered his medics to evacuate the patients while he stayed behind to draw enemy fire. He crawled to an abandoned machine gun position on the front line and began firing into the mass of charging soldiers. Days later, his body was found slumped over that gun. Ahead of him lay 98 dead Japanese soldiers. Salomon had sustained 76 bullet holes and dozens of bayonet wounds, many of which he suffered while he was still actively repositioning the weapon to keep the enemy at bay. His refusal to stop fighting ensured the survival of his patients. While it took nearly 60 years to navigate the military rules regarding armed medics, Salomon was eventually awarded the Medal of Honor for a stand that physically lasted long after he should have been incapacitated. A monk, an admiral, and a dentist. These three figures operated in vastly different centuries, yet their final moments followed a nearly identical tactical pattern. They each reached a point where their survival was no longer possible, but their mission was not yet complete. By using their own bodies as tools, whether by bracing a spear, delegating a uniform, or manning a gun through dozens of wounds, they forced the physical world to accommodate their duty. These instances suggest that the most impactful act of a life can occur in the window between a fatal wound and the final collapse, where a person's presence on the battlefield persists purely because they refuse to leave the living behind.